Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a special request that I'm delighted to be able to fulfill because I didn't think I'd have a good reason to. But, I did a video recently called Why Black Composers Matter, which got a very good response, except for the usual predictable, well, you know what I mean. I don't have to go into it. One of you said to me, why don't you talk about the Sony Black Composers series box? Here it is, Black Composers. And this was the subject of a very, very intelligent and detailed, typically, review by Jed Distler on the ClassicsToday.com website. And if you are a ClassicsToday.com insider member, because it's behind the insider member subscriber wall, and I recommend that you become an insider. It's a good thing to be. You can read Jed's review and also hear some sound samples, because we can do that over there without worrying about copyright claims, which is what happens here at YouTube. It's really kind of insane the way that whole thing works, but I'm not going into that again either. We're going to talk about the box. 10 CDs, 9 of which technically were part of the Black Composer series that came out between 1974 and 1978. And this is an important box for several reasons, not only because it highlights the work of an entire constellation of Black composers, but because it proves that they're just as lousy as white composers. That's how I feel about it. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter whether you're black or white. What matters is that you're a composer. And as with all contemporary composers, 99% of what they do is going to be garbage, and 1% is going to be interesting. And Black composers are no different from any other group of composers, and this is the box that proves it. So I feel very, very good about that. But there was another point I wanted to bring up, actually, in connection with this particular box. Some of you had comments, which I thought, I know you were trying to be smart, but you really should think twice about it. It was to the effect of, well, they're only making these recordings because the composers are black, and I would rather have quality work than just doing it because they're black. Well, that is just such a dumb remark. And I'm going to tell you why it's a dumb remark. It's a dumb remark because there is always a selection process. Nobody in their right mind makes recordings of music that they think is garbage just because the composer had, an extra toe or was autistic, or because they were black or white or green or blue. That's part of it. Sure, there has to be a selection process. There has to be criteria for the selection. But within the constellation of people who meet the criteria, you want to pick the best. You curate. You try to find their best work or their most representative work. So it's not a question of the fact that, well, they're only getting recorded because they're black and what they did is of no moment. The quality of what they did is of no moment. Of course that's not true. There are intelligent and knowledgeable people carefully selecting the representative works that go into these collections, or any recording by anybody. And of course, we hope that we've made a good selection. But the fact that they're black isn't the only issue. It's never the only issue. Not with anybody or anything. So please, can I not hear that anymore from you theoretically intelligent people who are trying to prove your openness by insisting on quality over quantity? That is just such a bullshit argument, frankly. So I hope that puts that to rest. Anyway, let's talk about what's in the box, shall we? We've got, like I said, 9 CDs from the actual Black Composers series. Now, one of the reasons this proves that black composers are just as horrible as white composers is because 1974 to 1978 was the very, very heart of the squeak bloop period, the academic serialist interruption that turned out to be a boil on the rump of Western civilization. And so a lot of this music is going to be by black composers who were doing what everybody else was doing, which was writing squeaky bloopy things. And some of them are, decent squeaky bloopy things, and some of them are just irritating. But it's up to you to decide which is which. And of course, there's much more here besides, because we begin Well, maybe I should use, these are all original covers, by the way, which is fine. I should probably do it this way because I'm sure to get the actual works if I do a track listing, that are on the actual discs. But I don't think anything else was compiled here. So we begin with music by Joseph Bologna, the Chevalier de Saint Georges, the famous French half black, half white swordsman and conductor and composer who was active in France and philanderer. Oh, he was really like, he was high up on the list of French salon ladies who wanted to have a taste, who had a taste for the exotic. I mean, really, he had quite a career, an extraordinary career. And he was a very good composer. He actually conducted the orchestra of the Loge Olympique, I think, or the Concert Spirituel, or one of those things that commissioned Haydn's Paris symphonies. He was really a major force, a tremendous force, a fascinating character who's been getting a lot of attention lately. Now, his music, he was called the French Mozart. He was no Mozart. He was a good, solid composer in that classical period vein and French style. He wrote symphonies, concertants, things like that. Really good stuff. So what we have here is his Symphony Number 1 in G major, which is a charming work in 3 peppy little movements. His String Quartet Number 1. Now his quartets were sort of quatuor brillant, whatever they called them. They had really big parts for the first violin. It was sort of the show off. And this is just a 2-movement little piece. And then we have a symphony concertant for 2 violins in orchestra. That's kind of like another 2-movement thing, an allegro and a rondo. I mean, these were light, ingratiating pieces. They're not pieces that go on for great lengths of time and plumb the depths. You know what I mean? But they're tuneful and charming. And finally, we get a scene from Ernestine. I don't think any of his operas have survived. Sidi just recorded one of them, I think the one that survives. But anyway, we have a scene from Ernestine. And who's playing this stuff? Oh, the London Symphony Orchestra. The conductor is Paul Freeman, who led this whole series. The Juilliard String Quartet. I mean, first-class performances and artists. And Miriam Fried and Jaime Laredo, violins. And Faye Robinson is the soprano. So that's disc 1. Disc 2 is devoted, partly in any case, to William Grant Still. Now, William Grant Still is a composer who's still awaiting his time in the sun. Naxos fortunately recorded his symphonies, and there are 5 of them, and some other works besides. He wrote in all possible media. He was a very, very talented composer. His style was considered hopelessly passé. It was that combination, sort of Gershwin, spiritual, jazz, classical fusion style. But it's really good. I mean, he knew what he was doing. And we have his Symphony Number 1, which is his most popular work, the Afro-American Symphony. This is a fascinating work. It really is. First of all, I mean, it's not terribly long. It's about, let's see, what is this? It's 12 plus 11. It's about 25 minutes long, but it's a very tragic piece. I mean, you listen to it, it doesn't end, with total happiness. It doesn't. It's somewhat dark and broody and bluesy and very moving. And people don't give works written in that style any credit for having depth. And Still's music has depth. It really does. It's a beautiful piece. And then we have 2 arias from his opera Highway 1 USA, which I would love to hear all of. They're really cool. And then we've got some music by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. We have, let's see, what is this thing? Oh, a bit of Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, his most famous piece in the English choral tradition, and the Danse Nègre for orchestra from his African suite. Now, all of that stuff has been, Hiawatha's Wedding Feast was recorded by Argo, and the African suite's been recorded a couple of times. So you can get complete versions of these works, and I'm going to be talking about some of them anon. But, the Danse Nègre is so much fun because there's nothing to do with anything nègre. It's sort of like a typical late romantic piece of ballet dance stuff. It's not even as exotic as the Bacchanal from Samson and Delilah. It's just a nice, entertaining, rhythmic dance piece. So there you go. Then we've got Ulysses K. Now, Ulysses K lived from, let's see, what is this, 1917 to 1995? Did you make it that far? Yeah, it looks like it. His music is thorny. He's not a squeak blooper, particularly, but his music is sort of maybe like Honegger in his dissonant mode. I mean, it's gnarly. It's gnarly, but interesting. It may be early Roger Sessions, people like that, if you know what I mean, if you know what I'm talking about. And this is a piece called Markings. And then we have George Walker, his Concerto for Trombone and Orchestra, which is not a bad work, actually. I have to tell you a George Walker story. And this is really kind of depressing. George Walker was a Pulitzer Prize winning composer. He lived a very long life. He passed away quite recently. Yeah, 1922 to 2018. And I think toward the end of his career, he became somewhat embittered. He was celebrated as sort of America's iconic black composer who was still around. I reviewed some of his symphonies and other things. They were on Albany. And I didn't like them at all. I thought they were very dry and inexpressive and kind of bony and uninspired. And I was very honest about it, you know. I wasn't nasty. It was just what it was. And I didn't like it. And I started getting hate mail from Mr. Walker accusing me of being a racist because I did not like his music. And then one of our reviewers, Jed Disler, also on Classics Today, did a disc in which he was the piano soloist. And it was a Schumann disc. It was just a Schumann disc. And Jed pointed out that he was not as great a pianist as, say, Vladimir Horowitz. And we got more hate mail claiming to be racist and threatening legal action and all kinds of stuff like that. It was just terrible. And, you know, I as a result of that, I sort of ignored most of George Walker. I mean, I listened to it, but I didn't review it or talk about it not because I was afraid of legal action, but because I didn't think he deserved the publicity. It was that simple. I mean, why should I go out of my way to spend time and effort, talking about music for somebody who has no appreciation for anything that we were going to say, unless it was his standard of, fawning praise. So that was George Walker, and it really left a bad taste in my mouth, and it still does. I mean, as you can see, I think the whole episode was lamentable. Anyway, this is his trombone concerto. It's not bad. There's another big work of his on here, the piano concerto, that, as Jed points out, is not nearly as good as the trombone concerto. He wrote some lovely programmatic works in smaller forms. His big, more ambitious pieces, I think, are well, you have to listen to each one. I haven't heard them all. And you have to take each case as it comes. But I hear in these bigger works that I have heard a straining for effect and a dryness that I think is really kind of off-putting for me. Maybe it may not be for you. So there you go. Then we've got this very interesting guy on CD4, Roque Cordero. Now, Roque Cordero is a Panamanian composer. His dates were 1917 to 2008. He's also sort of the gnarly school, but he's very interesting. He's kind of a Panamanian African Bartok, if you want to call it that. And on this disc, we have his violin concerto, which is quite a work. It's a major, major, big work in a sort of thorny but fun to listen to idiom. It's just wonderful. I mean, it's all I can say. I think it's terrific. It's ambitious and it's challenging and it's well written. And also his 8 miniatures for small orchestra, which have also been recorded before. We can talk about those too. Tiny, tiny little bits of musical inspiration. And again, they are all a little bit challenging, but full of energy. And I like his music. I think he's really a cool guy. I'd like to hear more of his stuff. Then we've got Jose Mauricio Nunes Garcia from 1787 to 1830. This is his Requiem Mass. And it is a Requiem Mass in the style of, you know who's Requiem Mass. That is Mozart. It's a good piece. It's an enjoyable piece. There's nothing not to like. This is with the Helsinki Philharmonic and Paul Friedman, with a quartet of soloists, including some Betty Allen is on there, and Dorleen Davis, William Brown, and Matti Tuloisella, something like that. He's Finnish, I assume. And it's what an interesting piece to hear. It really is kind of nifty. one of the Afro-Spanish or Afro-Latino composers in the New World. Rather cool. Then we've got, let's see, Jose White Lafitte, who was, let's see, 1836 through to 1918. Now, he was active in New York, actually, in the U.S. He was one of those traveling violin virtuoso guys, that we had in the Romantic period. He wrote music mostly for himself. And here we have his Concerto for Violin and Orchestra in F sharp minor, a very interesting key for a violin concerto. And it's a fun work and a conservative, somewhat, Paganini-esque. Well, is it Paganini-esque? Maybe not quite, but bel canto style that most violinists, people like Ernst and, Wieniawski and, those people did in those days. With Aaron Rosand, an exceptional violinist, and the LSO and Paul Freeman again. And then we have David Baker's Sonata for Cello and Piano with Janos Starker and Alan Planis. I mean, we're talking major people here. That's a good work too. It really is. It's interesting and pithy and worth hearing. So there's that. Now we've got more William Grant still. We have Saji, his ballet for orchestra and chorus. Saji is a good work. It's fun to listen to, and you really ought to hear it. You'll enjoy it. And the African Suite it's for string orchestra, and we get pieces by Fela Savande and George Walker's Lyric for Strings. This is with the LSO and Paul Freeman again. And I wonder, because the African Suite, I'm just checking here. Is it on here? Yeah, not here. It's not on this one. It's on the second volume, I've heard here, which we'll talk about, of Sidi's African Heritage Symphonic Series, and which were all recordings with the Chicago Sinfonietta. And I think when these went out of print, Paul Freeman, who did that series, decided to remake some things. So the African Suite has 3 movements: Joyful Day, Nostalgia, and Akinla. And it's for string orchestra, and it's just charming music, pleasant, enjoyable music. George Walker's Lyric for Strings is lovely. It's much better, I think, than some of his larger pieces. The ballet by Still is terrific. It's a wonderful disc. And then we've got, let's see, CD 8, Ollie Wilson, Aquan for piano, electric piano, amplified strings, and orchestra. Well, this, as you can tell from the forces, is a more avant-garde kind of piece. I don't think it's bad avant-garde. I think it's kind of interesting, actually. Jed liked it, and so do I. It's not something I'm going to play every day. It does have its squeak and bloop moments, but it's not terrible. And then we've got a piece called Squares, Essay for Orchestra by Thomas Jefferson Anderson. And we have Vision of Ishwara by Talib Rasul Hakim. Some more contemporary African-American composers. Thomas Jefferson Anderson, according to this, is still with us, although he was born in 1928. And Talib Rasul Hakim was 1940 to 1988. This is the Baltimore Symphony and Paul Freeman. All of this is more challenging stuff. And, you'll listen to it and decide for yourself if it's for you and whether it's great music or whether it's like the rest of the junk that so many composers were turning out in the 1970s. And then we have George Walker's Piano Concerto, which I said before was not something that impressed me at all. I found it rather uninspired and work a day. Adolphus Hailstork, fine composer. He's only represented by this tiny work, Celebration. I wish that there were more of his music out there. I talked about Joanne Folletta's complete CD of his music on Naxos a couple days ago. It's first-class stuff, absolutely first-class stuff. And if you hear rattling in the background, it's the cats playing with a paper bag or something like that. I don't know, they're making noise. And then finally, Hale Smith's Ritual and Incantations. This is fun. It sounds like exactly what it says it is. It's sort of spooky and hieratic, and then it's cool. It's got some really good sounds in it. I think it's like 10 minutes long or 15 minutes here. Yeah. The ritual is ritualistic. The incantations are incantorial. There's nothing not to like. And it has some healthy swats on the tam-tam, which always endears a piece to my heart. You know that. Finally, a bonus disc on CD 10. We have Symphonic Spirituals These are with William Brown, tenor, Barbara Jordan, the late great Barbara Jordan, narrator, with the Royal Philharmonic and Paul Freeman. These are symphonic arrangements of spirituals by a lot of African American composers, including Hale Smith, who we just heard, and Donald Erb and William Brown, not all African American composers, and Frederick Tillis and Morton Gould, yeah, that's who they are. You've got how many of them? 12 of them, a dozen of them, and they're lovely arrangements and fun to listen to, and it makes a nice bonus. It's with the Royal Philharmonic and people like that. So that is the Black Composers series. And like I said, it's a well-curated, thoughtful series of what ought to be the most characteristic and, dare I say, some of the best music created by Black composers in the 20th century. There is so much more. So much more. And you can argue with the choice of works or the way that these things were curated, particularly when you're dealing with living composers, which is tetchy, because as I mentioned in connection with George Walker, they can be very tetchy and have very strong ideas about, what they want to represent them or not. And their choices may not be the best choices. It's just their choices, but it's that way with everybody because they're all the same. It's all the same. People are just people and composers are just composers. And what matters is that they composed and that their work has an opportunity to be heard, and we have an opportunity to judge it, which we should do fearlessly and without prejudice, of course. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.